What happens when the most powerful female executive in American media walks into a glass boardroom on a Monday morning in Manhattan, sits down at the head of a table surrounded by 12 senior directors, and finds herself looking directly into the eyes of the man who destroyed her career 5 years ago, fired her with a single phone call, and told her she would never work in this industry again? Chen had spent 5 years building herself back from nothing, not from the bottom, from below the bottom, from the specific airless place you land when someone powerful decides to erase you and has enough influence to make it stick. She had crawled out of that place 1 inch at a time, in cities where nobody knew her name, doing work that nobody saw, until she was no longer crawling, until she was running, until she was the woman that Apex Global Media had flown to New York in a private car and sat at the head of their most troubled division's table and handed the keys to like a last resort and a first choice at the same time. She had known he would be in that room. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything now, completely, coldly, and without mercy. What she had not prepared for was the look on his face when he saw her. Chen was 34 years old, and she had the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have been through a fire and decided on the other side of it that nothing will ever move them that fast again. She had dark eyes that registered everything and gave back very little, a voice that had been trained by 5 years of presenting in rooms where nobody wanted to listen to her, and a reputation in the restructuring world that had been built so quietly and so precisely that most people in the industry knew the results of her work without knowing her name. That was intentional. She had grown up in Queens, the daughter of a Taiwanese immigrant father who ran a dry cleaning business on Northern Boulevard and a mother who taught ESL at the local high school and believed with complete conviction that education was the only door in America that opened from the inside. Maya had walked through every door she could find. Queens College on a scholarship, Columbia Business School on a second scholarship and 2 part-time jobs, an entry-level position at Meridian Media Group at 23 that she had turned through 5 years of 18-hour days and an ability to identify a broken business model from 3 floors away into a senior director role by 28. She had been good at her job in the specific way that makes people who are only pretty good at their job uncomfortable. She saw things they missed. She moved faster than they expected. She did not wait to be invited into a conversation she knew she should be in. This had made her, in certain quarters, unpopular. In certain quarters specifically, meaning one man. His name was Grant Wheeler. He was 41 years old when Maya worked for him, the EVP of Content Strategy at Meridian, a man who had been raised in Connecticut and educated at Yale, and who had spent his career collecting the kind of institutional confidence that comes from doing exceptional work, but from being consistently present in rooms where exceptional work was rewarded. He hired Maya. He took credit for her work for 2 years. He smiled at her in meetings and dismissed her in private, and twice told her ideas she had presented to him in one-on-ones before presenting them to the senior leadership team as his own. Maya had documented all of this with the particular methodical patience of someone who understands that the truth, assembled carefully enough, eventually becomes undeniable. She had been 32 days away from presenting that documentation to HR when Grant moved first. She never knew exactly what he said or who he called. She knew that on a Thursday afternoon in September, she had been called into a conference room by the chief people officer, a woman named Sandra who could not look her in the eye, and told that her position was being eliminated as part of a strategic restructure. She knew that the restructure was announced 3 days later, and her role was the only one eliminated. She knew that within 48 hours, the 3 industry contacts she had tried to call for references had not returned her calls. Not one. She knew that at a conference in Chicago 2 months later, a junior colleague named Ben had told her, not unkindly, that Grant Wheeler had made several phone calls, that he had used the word unreliable, that he had used the phrase difficult to manage, that he had used in at least one conversation the word unstable. Maya sat in her Queens apartment, the one she had moved back to after giving up the place in Midtown she could no longer afford, and she felt the bottom of that word, unstable, applied to a woman who had never once missed a deadline, never once lost a client, never once walked into a room unprepared, applied by a man whose most original idea in 5 years had come out of her mouth first. She sat with it for exactly one weekend. She cried for exactly one night, not from sadness, she understood later, but from the specific fury of someone who has been told by the world that their reality is not real. And then, on Monday morning, she got up, made coffee, opened her laptop, and started over. Not in New York. New York knew Grant Wheeler, and Grant Wheeler knew New York, and she was not going to rebuild in a city where the foundation had been poisoned. She went to Atlanta first, a small restructuring consultancy that nobody in New York had ever heard of, but had a client list of mid-sized media companies that were quietly bleeding out and desperately needed someone who could read a P&L statement and a content strategy in the same breath. She worked there for 14 months and turned 3 failing clients into 2 acquisitions and 1 turnaround that was written up in Adweek without her name attached to it, the way she preferred. Then Denver. Then Austin, then a private equity firm in Chicago that specialized in distressed media assets, and they were so impressed with her track record that they gave her a title and a budget and pointed her at their worst-performing portfolio company and told her to do whatever she thought was right. She tripled their return in 22 months. Her name was not in the press release, but it was in the room where the right people talked. Apex Global Media was one of the largest media conglomerates in the country. Their North American content division had been in structural freefall for 3 years, wrong bets on streaming, a senior leadership team that had not changed personnel or thinking since 2018, and a brand portfolio that was simultaneously overextended and underperforming. The board had tried 2 restructuring firms and a new CEO. Nothing had worked. They needed someone who had seen this exact kind of damage before and knew where to cut and what to save and how to tell the difference when everything looked the same shade of broken. A board member named Patricia Voss, who had been 2 years ahead of Maya at Columbia and had watched her work for a decade from a respectful distance, made a call. Maya took the meeting. She took the job. She drove from her Chicago apartment to O'Hare Airport on a Sunday evening in January, knowing that she was going to New York, knowing that Grant Wheeler was a senior vice president of Apex's North American content division, knowing that he was going to be in the first meeting. She had prepared for it. She was wearing a charcoal blazer she had bought specifically for this day, not because she cared about clothing, but because she understood that first impressions in rooms like this are read in the first 4 seconds, and she intended to be the thing those 4 seconds were about. She had reviewed every quarter of Apex's North American performance data for the past 3 years. She had read every public statement made by every person who would be in that room. She had read Grant Wheeler's LinkedIn profile and his industry conference appearances and the one profile piece a trade publication had run on him 18 months ago, in which a former colleague was quoted as calling him a leader who makes everyone around him better. She had read that line 3 times. She had felt something in her jaw tighten. She had let it pass. She had moved on. She was not here for revenge. She had told herself with complete conviction. She was here because Apex Global needed what she could do, and because she had spent 5 years building the ability to do it, and because the work was real and the opportunity was real, and she was not going to let the presence of one man in one room make her smaller than she had become. She believed this mostly. She also, in a small and honest corner of herself, believed that there was a particular satisfaction available in walking into a room as the authority that she intended to fully, professionally, and quietly collect. The car dropped her at Apex Building on 6th Avenue at 8:52 a.m. on a Monday morning. The lobby was glass and steel, and the particular brand of corporate self-importance that Manhattan office buildings wear like a second skin. The receptionist gave her a visitor badge. The elevator opened on the 31st floor. A young woman named Priya, who was clearly someone's assistant and clearly trying very hard, walked her to the main conference room and offered her water and coffee and the specific over-eager kindness of someone who has been told that the new person is important. She took the coffee. She walked into the conference room. 12 people around the table, 7 men, 5 women. Senior directors, VPs, division heads. She had memorized their names and their roles from the org chart Patricia had sent her. Her eyes moved across the room in the way they always did, reading the room in the first seconds, who sat where, who looked up, who looked away, who was already on their phone. She found Grant Wheeler in the 3rd second. He was seated 4 chairs from the head of the table on the right side, in a position that on any normal Monday would have placed him within reach of the decision-making center. He was wearing a dark navy suit. His hair was slightly more gray than his LinkedIn profile. He was looking down at a printed agenda when she walked in. He looked up. He saw her. Every other person in that room, when they looked at the new executive walking in, showed some version of assessment, curiosity, wariness, the professional blankness of people reserving judgment. Grant Wheeler's face showed something else entirely. It showed, in the space of 1.5 seconds before he controlled it, the specific expression of a man who has told himself that a particular thing cannot happen and is now watching it happen. Maya held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. She did not smile. She did not signal anything. She simply held it with the stillness of someone who had 5 years to decide what this moment would look like.
And then she moved her eyes to the room and said, "Good morning. I'm Maya Chen. Thank you all for being here." She ran the meeting for 2 hours. She did not use the word restructure once. She did not use the word cuts. She talked about architecture, what was load-bearing and what wasn't, what could be rebuilt and what needed to be replaced entirely. She cited specific data from their quarterly reports by memory. She asked 3 questions of the room that nobody had thought to ask and that did not have clean answers, which was the point. She listened to the answers she got with the particular quality of attention that makes people feel seen and also faintly assessed. Grant Wheeler spoke twice. The first time, 15 minutes in, to offer a piece of context about a failed streaming initiative that was accurate but that stopped a full quarter before the decision that had actually killed it. Maya listened to him finish. She said, "Thank you, Grant. The Q3 data tells a slightly different story from there. Let me walk everyone through it." She walked them through it. She did not look at him while she did it. The second time was near the end, when he offered a strategic recommendation for the rebrand of their flagship news vertical. It was a competent recommendation. It was also, Maya recognized with the specific chill of someone who has heard their own thinking come back to them through someone else's mouth, nearly identical to a framework she had outlined in a strategy memo she had written at Meridian 7 years ago. A memo she had sent to Grant Wheeler directly. A memo he had filed away and apparently kept. She looked at him when he finished. She looked at him with complete neutrality for a beat that was 1 second longer than comfortable. "That framework has merit," she said. "It was actually pioneered in a Meridian strategy document around 2018. We can revisit it as a reference point. I have some updated thinking on where it needs to evolve." She moved on. She did not look at his face. She did not need to. After the meeting, as the room cleared out, she stood by the window reviewing a document on her tablet. She heard the room empty out. She heard one set of footsteps stop. Grant. She let 2 seconds pass before she turned. Grant was standing 3 feet away. He looked composed. His posture was the posture of a man who has decided on the walk across the room that he is going to be gracious and in control, and who is finding, now that he is here, that the composure is costing him more than he expected. "Grant," she said, pleasantly, professionally, like a doctor who had already read the chart. "I didn't know you were coming," he said. "I gathered," she said. A beat. He straightened slightly. "It's been a while." 5 years, Maya said, approximately. He absorbed that. His jaw moved slightly. "I want you to know what happened at Meridian. I've thought about it, the way things ended for you there." "I appreciate that," Maya said, which was not the same as accepting it, and they both knew it, and she watched him understand that she knew it. "We should schedule some time this week. I want to go through the North American content P&L with the full divisional team, and I'd like to start with the strategy group you oversee. Wednesday works for me. I'll have Priya send a calendar invite." It was not a question. It was the shape a question takes when it had already been answered. "Of course," Grant said. His voice was level. His eyes were not. "Thank you," Maya said. She turned back to her document. She heard him leave. She stood at the window of the 31st floor conference room and looked at 6th Avenue 31 floors below and felt something move through her that was not triumph exactly. It was quieter than that.
It was the specific feeling of a thing that has been unresolved for a very long time, finally arriving at its resolution, not with drama, not with noise, but with the clean, permanent click of a lock turning. In the weeks that followed, Maya restructured the North American content division with the same methodical precision she had brought to every job she had taken since Atlanta. She made decisions that were correct and difficult. She had conversations that required her to say hard things to people who didn't want to hear them. She built relationships with the people in the organization who were carrying more than their title suggested, which was always the people nobody had been paying attention to. And she gave them resources and room and the specific message, never said out loud, but always understood, that she saw them. She also watched Grant Wheeler. She watched him because it was her job to watch everyone. She watched him specifically because he ran the strategy group, and the strategy group was central to her restructure, and she needed to understand what she was working with. She was clinical about it. She was also honest with herself, in the private accounting she kept in the early morning hours before the day started, that there was a second layer to what she was watching for. She found it on a Thursday in February. She was reviewing personnel files, something she did herself without delegation because she believed that an organization's true architecture was visible in its people records if you knew how to read them. She was in Grant's group's files. She found 3 people who had been flagged in performance reviews under his supervision in the past 2 years. Flagged not for underperformance, but for being in the review language that appeared across all 3 files with suspicious consistency, difficult to manage, and unreliable. All 3 were women. All 3 had initiated ideas in documented strategy sessions that subsequently appeared in presentations made by Grant's team. All 3 had quietly left the company. One went to a competitor where she had been promoted twice in 18 months. She read the files twice. She closed the laptop. She sat in her office on the 31st floor conference room and looked at the Manhattan skyline and felt the specific cold clarity that comes when a pattern becomes undeniable. She called Patricia Voss that evening. She did not tell Patricia what to do. She laid out what she had found, clearly and without embellishment, the way you lay out diagnostic evidence. Here is the data. Here is what it shows. Here is the pattern across 3 separate cases. Here is the external outcome for the person who left. She answered Patricia's questions. She made one recommendation, stated once, that HR conduct an independent review of the flagged personnel actions before the divisional restructure finalized any role eliminations. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been holding this?" "I found it today," Maya said. "I'm not holding anything. I'm telling you what I found." "And the history between you and Wheeler?" "Is exactly why I called you instead of acting on this myself. Whatever happens with this information should happen on its own merits, not on mine." Patricia was quiet again. "I'll initiate the review," she said. "It will be independent of your restructure process." "That's all I'm asking," Maya said. She hung up the phone. She sat in her office for a while longer. The Manhattan skyline did what it always did, blazed and glittered, and remained completely indifferent. She thought about her father's dry cleaning business on Northern Avenue. She thought about her mother's conviction that education was the only door in America that opens from the inside. She thought about the Thursday afternoon 5 years ago when she had been called into a conference room by a woman who couldn't look her in the eye. She thought about one weekend, one night of crying, and Monday morning. She opened her laptop. There was an email from Patricia Voss that said simply, "Excellent work. What's next?" Maya looked at the tulips. She looked at the Manhattan skyline. She looked at the question on the screen and felt in the full, deep center of her chest the specific warmth of a person who has walked all the way through something and is standing now on the other side of it, in the light, with room to move in any direction she chooses. She began to type. She had not gotten here because someone gave her a door. She had gotten here because she spent 5 years building one in Atlanta and Denver and Austin and Chicago in rooms where nobody knew her name, one quiet inch of excellent work at a time.
And now the door was open, and the light was coming through it, and she was 34 years old, and she was just getting started. "What's next?" Patricia had asked. Maya Chen smiled. It was not the smile she wore in boardrooms. It was the one she kept for herself, the one that her mother would have recognized from 2 rooms away. "Everything," she typed back. "Absolutely everything." If this story stayed with you, share it with every woman who has ever been told she is too much and proved them completely wrong. Subscribe to this channel for a brand new story every single week. We will see you next time.